Hi, my name is Daniela C, and I'm a junior at Northside High School.
Hi, my name is Jerome Hernandez and I'm a junior at Northside High School.
Hi, my name is Sharon J, and I'm a junior at Northside High School.
Hi, my name is Tabari B, and I'm a junior at Northside High School.
Hi, I'm Sandra P, and I'm a junior at Northside High School. And this is our video of the autobiographies of Frederick Douglass
And Booker T. Washington.
I'm going to be talking about Booker T. Washington's first 4 audios of his autobiography. He was influenced by one of the strongest personalities in modern education and very generous Armstrong himself. Mr. Washington was known for teaching people of Tuskegee. The race divergence under this education became wider. The South had a high sincere regard to Mr. Washington, who has done a great rational service. Mr. Washington has done a worldwide fame at an early age. His story had already been translated to other languages. In his autobiography, it talks about his youth during slavery. He was born in a cabin with his mother, brother, and sister after the Civil War. His mother was the plantation cook. Slaves felt the deprivation because the usual diet for slaves were cornbread and corn. He never played sports because he was occupied with labor not large enough for his service. Carrying water, getting mail, and having a heavy bag of corn. He had no school because he was a slave. He carried the books of his mistress as far as the school door. The first knowledge he had was the fact that he was a slave and that his mother wished that Lincoln and his army would may be successful and that one day she and her children would be free. When he was a child during the Civil War, he recalled the whispered discussion the mother and other plantation slaves had about the situation. They said that the freedom of slavery would be the one great result of the war. Often, the slaves would get information about the news, and that's how they kept up with the happenings. When President Lincoln freed the slaves with the Emancipation Proclamation, Booker T. Washington decided to seek for education. He wanted to go to the school that were said was a good school for colored people, not like the one in his town. He was hired to make $5 a month working at a house with Mrs. Ruffner. Most of his study was done at night. He began putting any kind of book he could in a box. He called it a library. He did not know how far Hampton School was or how much it cost to go there. The small amount of money he earned went to his family and his stepfather, and left little money for him to buy clothes and traveling expenses. There was no train that ran to Western Virginia, so he traveled over the mountains and got to an old hotel where the train passengers could seek for hospitality. He went to the hotel and they did not want to even attend him. This is when he first noticed what it meant to have his color of his skin. He wanted to go to Hampton so bad he begged for rides. He had no money and did not know where to go. He gathered money to go to Richmond. As soon as he got to Hampton School, he presented himself to the head teacher for an assignment to a class. He did not make a good impression because he had not taken a shower, eaten a good meal, or had presentable clothes. The head teacher said that the head room needed sweeping. To impress her, he joyfully swept it 3 times and dusted the room spotless. He returned to the teacher and she was impressed and accepted him to the institution. He accepted the job of janitor, which paid for his lessons in Hampton. Life at Hampton took him to a new world. The use to the bed sheets, toothpaste, meals at regular hours, the use of the bathtub were all new to him.
Hi, my name is Tabari B, and I'll be talking about chapters 4 to 9 in Up From Slavery. In Up From Slavery, Booker talks about 2 important years in his life. It begins at the end of his first year at Hampton University when he realized how unfortunate he was. He would try to sell different items, but it didn't go well. He did decide to do some work for a restaurant nearby to visit his home. He then continued his studies in janitor work. In the next chapter, Washington talks about the Reconstruction period. The Reconstruction period ended the remnants of Confederate secession and ended slavery, making the newly freed slave citizens with civil rights ostensibly guaranteed by their new constitutional amendments. Three visions of Civil War memory appeared during the Reconstruction. The Reconciliationist vision, which was rooted in copying with the death and devastation the war had brought. The white supremacist vision, which included segregation and the preservation of the traditional cultural standards of the South. And the emancipationist vision, which sought full freedom, citizenship, and constitutional equality for African Americans.
Hello, my name is Sharon Jimenez, and I'll be talking about chapters 10 through 15 of Booker T. Washington. It was hard for them to get students to help. Making bricks was not easy. It required skill and knowledge. Since most students were poor, Washington knew that teaching them about building would please them. He also wanted them to know that you could learn from your mistakes. Throughout 19 years of building, 40 buildings were built. Most of them were built by students, except for 4 of them. Chapter 10, a harder task than making bricks without straw. Washington was determined to have not only agricultural and domestic work, but having to erect their own buildings too. This would teach students to see the utility of labor and beauty. This will also teach them how to appreciate things. The most trying experience was brick making. When they got the farm work, they directed their efforts toward making bricks. They established this because there were no brick yards in town and there was a demand for bricks in the market. They had no experience nor money to make the bricks. Making bricks was hard. In order to make bricks, you had to be in the mud for hours. At this point, brick making was important to schools. Students started to master building bricks. White people started buying bricks from them because they realized that the bricks were good. Burning bricks was not easy either. They tried kilns, and it did not work until the 3rd try. They succeeded because people, especially teachers, helped them. Well, at least they thought they succeeded. They had failed again. They started building their own things, such as wagons, carts, and buggies. They started selling them at the market, and they had the same look they had with the bricks. The Negro were not making them worthless. They were just adding to the wealth and to the comfort of the community. People also started trading things for bricks. After this, Booker T. Washington had no money left. A lot of people told him to give up. Instead of giving up, he took a watch to the pawn shop and they gave him $15. With those $15, he decided to build a 4th kiln, and this time he actually succeeded. Later on came Mr. Warren Logan. He was the institute's treasurer and the acting principal when Washington wasn't around. If someone had the skill of making something, they will help the community if they wanted to. Any student, it didn't matter how much money they had to learn about industry. Some parents didn't want their kids to know about labor. They just wanted them to learn of books. On Thanksgiving Day, they held their first service at the chapel of the Porter Hall. He found a white man from Wisconsin known as Mr. Bedford to preach the Thanksgiving sermon. Mr. Bedford became one of the school trustees. For example, the meat was not done, or it was either burned. Salt had been left out of bread, or they were missing the tea. As they were almost finished with their building, they made a basement room which they used as the kitchen and the dining room. They did not have enough money to buy the necessary. Town merchants would let them get any food they wanted with credit. It was hard to cook the food because they didn't have any stoves. The first 2 weeks they had problems with the food. Chapter 11, making their beds before they could lie on them. Later on, they received a visit from Hampton's Institute Treasurer J.F.B. Marshall, who gave them their first $250 to make payment. He stayed with them for a week. He made some inspections of the school and was very pleased with them and wrote some letters to Hampton. Later on, General Armstrong also visited. With the visit of some friends, the number of teachers increased at the school. Washington learned that great men cultivate love and only little men cherish hatred. He also learned that giving assistance to the weak made the one who gave stronger, and that oppression of the unfortunate makes one weak. With no money for the school, they couldn't provide board and sleeping accommodations. For this, they rented cabins near the school. They charged $8 to the students who stayed in the cabins. They did not have enough money to provide to the students, and $8 per student was not enough for everyone. When it was cold, the students suffered in the cabins. They barely even complained because they knew that Washington and everyone else were trying their best to give them what they needed. When Booker T. Washington was on his way to Dallas, Texas and Houston, Texas, some white people and some officials of the town will introduce themselves to him, and they will thank him for the work that he was doing for the South. Washington told the students that the institution was not his, but it was theirs. The students thought of Washington as an advisor and a friend. The students started making their own beds for the cabins and their own stools for school so they could sit. Later on, toothbrushes became important, and Washington wanted every student to have their own. Students were taught to bathe. Also, some students were taught to sleep at night since they came from plantation districts, and it was hard for them to sleep at night. The students were inspected every evening, and later on they just started teaching each other the things they had to do. Later on, General Armstrong also visited. With the visit of some friends, the number of teachers increased at the school. At first, rich people wouldn't help him. They wouldn't give him any money. Little by little, they started giving money to Washington so he could pay for the school. Chapter 13. 2,000 miles for a 5-minute speech. In 1884, night school was established. This was mainly for students who didn't have enough money because they had to work in order to pay their school. Spiritual training was not neglected. Washington had an ambition to do things instead of talking about them. Booker T. Washington had a meeting in Mississippi. This was just the beginning of his public speaking career. Chapter 14. The Atlanta Exposition Address. People always cheered for Booker T. Washington during his speeches. Because of Booker T. Washington, the Negro race was recognized a lot more, and they had many new opportunities now. Chapter 15. The Secret of Success in Public Speaking. Booker T. Washington's speeches were just the beginning of a moral revolution in America. He talked about his people to change things for the good. People cheered for him. He always left a good impression on white people, and he had a way to master his audience. Chapter 16. Europe. Washington was married to Miss Margaret James Mary, a native of Mississippi, in 1893. Before they got married, she was a teacher at Tuskegee. She didn't only help him with the school, she carried on a mother's meeting in the town.
Miss Washington also had a women's club. She was also president of the Federation of Southern Colored Women's Club and chairman of the executive committee of the National Federation of Colored Women's Club.
They had 3 kids. Washington's job keeps him away from his family a lot because he gave speeches. In 1899, Washington had the greatest surprise of his life. Some ladies arranged a meeting in the interest of Tuskegee. The best people in Boston attended.
One of the ladies who had organized a meeting asked Washington if he had ever been to Europe.
Some friends raised money for Booker T. Washington and Mrs. Washington for a trip to Europe for 2 to 4 months to meet new people and get involved in other clubs.
I'm going to discuss the chapters 0 to 5 on Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was born on February 14, 1818, in Cordova, Maryland, and died on February 20th, 1895. He had 2 spouses and 5 children. Frederick Douglass was born into slavery. He and his mother were separated when he was an infant. He stated that it is a common custom in Maryland, which he ran away, that the mother and child are separated from an early age. Frederick got to see his mother occasionally as she was 12 miles where he was positioned at. She would stay with him in the night and leave early in the morning, and if they weren't there by sunrise, they would get whipped. As time passed, his mother died. He was denied access to be with her during the time she was sick and when she took her last breath. As he was a slave, he had 2 masters. One was Captain Anthony and the other one was Mr. Plummer. He didn't go by the rules as he whipped a woman and her back was covered in blood, and as she screamed louder, he would hit her harder. Frederick was young as he witnessed this, and he had witnessed many more cruel and inhumane things. As he went to a new plantation, he was with 400 more slaves. The slaves were limited on their food and their clothes, most which were not sufficient enough for a living. None of the slaves had no beds, but were given 1 blanket. As he was there, he witnessed more whipping and inhumane things. After several failed attempts at escape, he finally escaped Covey's farm in 1838. After his escape, Frederick Douglass was known as an abolitionist leader, and he became one of the most famous conceptual of his time, as he advised presidents and lecturing to thousands of different topics, including women's rights, specifically the right of a woman to vote.
In chapters 5 through 10, Frederick Douglass is born into slavery, where he suffered from a lot of hunger and cold. He finally left the plantation when he was around 7 to 8 years old, and he was sent to Baltimore, where he met his mistress, Miss Allude, who was a really nice lady who taught him how to read, even though it was illegal to teach slaves how to read. During this time, Douglass started to question why white people were able to enslave black people. He then realized that if he learned how to read, he won't have to be a slave anymore. Then after some time, Miss Allude starts being really brutal against him to the point where he is not allowed to read anymore. Then Douglass finds out that there is a movement to abolish slavery, and after some time, Master Anthony dies, which meant that he was going to be inherited to another person. Master Thomas becomes his new master, and Thomas was a horrible person. So then Douglass moved to Covey's plantation, where he is mistreated, but one day he decided to fight back. Then he was sent to Mr. Freeland, where Douglass started teaching other slaves how to read, even though it was illegal and they couldn't do that. He tried to free the slaves. He tried to let them go free, but it was a fail. We're going to be comparing Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington.
They were both born into slavery.
Frederick Douglass became famous after he escaped slavery, and Booker T became famous at an early age.
When Frederick Douglass became free, he automatically started giving speeches and talked to some presidents. And on the other hand, Booker T. Washington wanted to go to school and get education.
Frederick Douglass's supporters helped him raise money so he could purchase his liberty, while Booker T. Washington worked hard for his education and nobody helped him.
Bye, Tabari! Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington both supported education for all communities. Frederick Douglass didn't have his freedom right away, like Mr. Washington, which he ran away most of the time. They both wanted to show that the black people can be just like any other, to be someone in life and get their education. They both believed that everyone was equal, and they both detested slavery. And this is the end of our video of how they became public figures.
And how Washington and Douglas were different and alike. We hope you liked our videos, and thanks so much for your time.